For over 40 years, two rock legends have been locked in one of the most bitter feuds in music history: David Gilmour and Roger Waters. Together, they created Pink Floyd. Together, they made some of the greatest albums ever recorded: The Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, The Wall. Then it all exploded in a war of egos that destroyed the band and the friendship. The fights over control, the lawsuit over the band name, the decades of insults traded in interviews. David Gilmour mostly stayed quiet, letting Roger dominate the narrative. But David has his own story, his own truth about what really happened. Now at 79 years old, David Gilmour is finally ready to reveal everything. Why Roger Waters became impossible to work with, what really caused Pink Floyd to implode, and the shocking admission about whether they can ever make peace. Keep watching, because what David reveals will change everything you thought you knew about Pink Floyd. Before we dive into video, subscribe to our channel. In 1963, a group of architecture students at London Polytechnic formed a band. Roger Waters played bass, Nick Mason played drums, Rick Wright played keyboards. They called themselves various names and played small gigs around London. They were decent but not special. Then in 1965, a brilliant but unstable art student named Syd Barrett joined as guitarist and singer. Syd transformed the band. His psychedelic vision and experimental approach made them unique. They changed their name to Pink Floyd. David Gilmour was not part of the original lineup. He grew up in Cambridge with Syd Barrett. They were childhood friends who taught each other guitar. In a 2015 interview with Rolling Stone magazine, David recalled jamming with Syd as teenagers. David said Syd was a natural genius, wildly creative, unpredictable, fearless. David said Syd was everything David was not. By 1967, Pink Floyd had a hit single called See Emily Play. They were becoming stars of the London underground scene, but Syd was falling apart. Heavy drug use, particularly LSD, was destroying his mind. He would stand on stage staring blankly, not playing, not singing, just starring. The band was terrified. In a 2003 documentary, Roger Waters described watching Syd deteriorate. Roger said it was like watching someone drown and not being able to save them. In late 1967, Roger called David Gilmour. Roger asked if David wanted to join Pink Floyd as a second guitarist to cover for Syd's increasing unreliability. David said yes immediately. In a 2006 interview with Mojo magazine, David said joining Pink Floyd felt like rescuing his childhood friend. David thought his presence might stabilize Syd. It did not. By April 1968, Syd was out of the band completely. David was in. The classic Pink Floyd lineup was formed. David said in a 2016 interview that Syd's departure haunted everyone, especially Roger. Roger had been close to Syd. Losing Syd to madness created a wound in Roger that never healed. David said Roger became obsessed with themes of insanity and absence. Every Pink Floyd album after Syd left dealt with those themes in some way. David said Roger never got over it. From 1968 to 1975, Pink Floyd evolved from an experimental psychedelic band into progressive rock giants. David brought melodic guitar work and a beautiful voice. Roger brought conceptual vision and dark lyrics. Rick created atmospheric keyboard textures. Nick provided steady rhythms. Together, they created masterpieces. In a 2014 interview, David said those early years were collaborative and exciting. Everyone contributed ideas. Everyone felt valued. The breakthrough came in 1973 with The Dark Side of the Moon. The album spent over 900 weeks on the Billboard charts. It sold over 45 million copies worldwide. It made Pink Floyd one of the biggest bands on the planet. David said in a 2011 interview that Dark Side of the Moon was a true band effort. Roger wrote most of the lyrics. David wrote the music to many songs, including Time and Us and Them. Rick contributed The Great Gig in the Sky. Everyone was essential, but success changed Roger. In a 2015 interview, David admitted that after Dark Side of the Moon, Roger started acting like the leader of Pink Floyd. Roger began dominating creative decisions. Roger would reject ideas from David and Rick. Roger wanted Pink Floyd to be his vehicle for his concepts. David said he tried to go along with it because Roger was producing great work, but resentment was building. The tension became visible during the recording of Wish You Were Here in 1975. The album was a tribute to Syd Barrett. The song Shine on You Crazy Diamond was directly about Syd. During the recording sessions, Syd actually showed up at the studio. He was overweight, bald, unrecognizable. Everyone was shaken. In a 2003 documentary, David described that moment as devastating. David said seeing what Syd had become made them all realize how fragile success was. Roger took Syd's appearance harder than anyone. In a 2014 interview, David said Roger became more controlling after that. Roger was determined to protect Pink Floyd from falling apart like Syd did. But Roger's method of protection was domination. Roger wanted total creative control. David said that is when the problems really started. By 1978, Pink Floyd was working on a new album called The Wall. It was Roger Waters' concept entirely. Roger wrote almost all the music and lyrics. The album was autobiographical. A rock star named Pink builds a metaphorical wall around himself due to trauma and isolation. Roger based Pink on himself and Syd Barrett. In a 2010 interview, David admitted The Wall was Roger's masterpiece, but it was also Roger's takeover of the band. David said in a 2015 interview with The Guardian that during the Wall sessions, Roger treated everyone like employees. Roger had a vision and everyone else was there to execute it. David played the guitar parts Roger told him to play. Rick played keyboards when Roger allowed it. Nick played drums according to Roger's directions. It was not a band anymore. It was Roger Waters' solo project with Pink Floyd as his backing band. The most painful moment came when Roger fired Rick Wright. During the recording sessions, Roger and Rick clashed repeatedly. Rick was struggling with personal problems including divorce. His focus was scattered. Roger lost patience. In a 2013 interview, David said Roger gave Rick an ultimatum. Quit the band or Roger would cancel the upcoming tour. Rick quit. David said watching Roger fire Rick was heartbreaking. Rick was a founding member. His keyboards were essential to the Pink Floyd sound, but Roger did not care. David stayed quiet during Rick's firing. In a 2018 interview, David admitted that was his biggest regret. David said he should have stood up to Roger, should have defended Rick, but David was afraid Roger would fire him too. David said his silence was cowardly. David said he let Roger destroy the band to protect his own position. Despite the internal chaos, The Wall was a massive success. Released in 1979, it became one of the best-selling albums of all time. The single Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 hit #1. The elaborate live shows were spectacular. From the outside, Pink Floyd was at their peak. From the inside, they were falling apart. David said in a 2016 interview that by the end of the Wall tour, he hated being in Pink Floyd. He hated Roger's dictatorship. He hated himself for allowing it. In 1983, Roger Waters presented his next concept for a Pink Floyd album called The Final Cut. It was about war and loss, specifically Roger's father, who died in World War II. David read Roger's material and was appalled. In a brutally honest 2015 interview, David said The Final Cut was not a Pink Floyd album. It was a Roger Waters solo album with the Pink Floyd name slapped on it. David said Roger had written everything. David's role was reduced to playing guitar on a few tracks. David said it was insulting. David tried to contribute songs. Roger rejected them all. In a 2006 interview, David said Roger told him his songs were not good enough. Roger said they did not fit the concept. David was furious. David said he was a talented songwriter, but Roger refused to acknowledge it. David said that rejection hurt more than anything. Recording sessions for The Final Cut were miserable. Roger and David barely spoke except to argue. Nick was caught in the middle trying to keep peace. Rick was gone. In a 2011 documentary, David described The Final Cut sessions as a funeral. Everyone knew Pink Floyd was dying, but they went through the motions anyway. When The Final Cut was released in 1983, it received mixed reviews. Some critics praised Roger's emotional depth. Others called it self-indulgent and depressing. Commercially, it did well, but nothing like previous albums. David said in a 2014 interview that the final cut proved his point. Without the collaborative spirit of the whole band, Pink Floyd was just okay. Not great. Roger's ego had destroyed what made them special. After the final cut, Roger Waters announced he was leaving Pink Floyd. In a 1984 press conference, Roger said the band was over. Pink Floyd was finished. David and Nick were shocked. In a 2016 interview, David said Roger expected them to just accept it. Roger thought he owned Pink Floyd. David said Roger was wrong. In 1986, David Gilmour and Nick Mason announced they were continuing Pink Floyd without Roger Waters. Roger was enraged. In interviews, Roger said Pink Floyd without him was meaningless. Roger said he was the creative force, the lyricist, the visionary. David and Nick were just musicians for hire. Roger said he would not allow them to use the Pink Floyd name. Roger sued David and Nick. The legal battle lasted years. Roger argued that he had written most of the music and concepts for Pink Floyd's biggest albums. Therefore, he should control the name. David and Nick argued that Pink Floyd was a four-person band and the name belonged to all of them. Roger had left. David and Nick were still there. They had the right to continue. The lawsuit was bitter and expensive. In a 2010 interview, David said the legal fight was exhausting and heartbreaking. David said he did not want to fight Roger. David just wanted to make music, but Roger forced the issue. David said Roger's need to control everything extended even to trying to control the band he had quit. In 1987, the court ruled in favor of David and Nick. They could continue as Pink Floyd. Roger lost. In interviews, Roger called the ruling unjust. Roger said David had stolen Pink Floyd from him. David fired back. In a 1988 interview, David said Roger quit the band. Roger walked away. David and Nick kept it alive. David said if anyone was the thief, it was Roger, who tried to take the name after abandoning the music. The public battle got ugly. Roger called David and Nick greedy. David called Roger a megalomaniac. In a 2015 interview, David admitted the things they said about each other during that period were terrible. David said both of them were hurt and angry and said things they should not have. David said the lawsuit turned former friends into enemies. In 1987, David Gilmour released the first post-Roger Pink Floyd album called A Momentary Lapse of Reason. David brought Rick right back as a session musician. David worked with outside songwriters. The album was polished and radio-friendly. Critics were skeptical. Roger publicly predicted it would fail. Roger said Pink Floyd without him was a cover band playing Pink Floyd songs. Roger was wrong. A Momentary Lapse of Reason was a huge commercial success. It went multi-platinum. The tour was one of the highest-grossing tour of the decade. Fans loved it. In a 1994 interview, David said the success proved that Pink Floyd was bigger than Roger Waters. David said Roger's ego could not accept that, but the sales numbers did not lie. David followed up with the Division Bell in 1994. Another massive success. Pink Floyd without Roger was thriving. Meanwhile, Roger's solo career was struggling. His albums sold modestly. His tour played smaller venues. The comparison was stark. David had won not just the legal battle but the commercial battle too. But David said in a 2015 interview that winning did not feel good. David said he never wanted to compete with Roger. David wanted to collaborate with Roger. David said the rivalry was Roger's creation, not his. David said he would have preferred to split the band amicably and remain friends, but Roger made that impossible. In 2005, something unexpected happened. Pink Floyd reunited for one performance at the Live 8 concert in London. David, Roger, Nick, and Rick all played together for the first time in 24 years. The performance was emotional and powerful. Millions watched. Fans hoped it meant a full reunion. It did not. In a 2015 interview, David described the Live 8 reunion as bittersweet. David said performing with Roger again reminded him of the old days. The magic they could create together. But backstage, the tension returned immediately. David said Roger was still Roger, controlling, difficult, convinced he was right about everything. David said within hours of the performance he knew a full reunion would never work. After Live 8, Roger publicly pushed for more Pink Floyd concerts and albums. David refused. In a 2015 interview, David said he had no interest in working with Roger again. David said one charity concert was fine, but going back into the studio with Roger would be torture. David said he was too old to deal with Roger's ego. Roger was hurt by David's rejection. In interviews, Roger said David was stubborn and unforgiving. Roger said he had tried to make peace. Roger said David was the one holding grudges. David fired back. In a 2016 interview, David said Roger's version of making peace meant David doing whatever Roger wanted. David said that was not peace, that was surrender. David said he would not surrender to Roger's ego ever again. Now in 2024, at 79 years old, David Gilmour is retired from touring. He has released what he says is his final solo album. He is reflecting on his life and career with total honesty. In recent interviews, David has made revelations about Roger Waters that he kept private for decades. First, David confirms that Roger Waters was a genius. In a 2023 interview with the New York Times, David said Roger wrote incredible lyrics. Roger had vision and ambition that pushed Pink Floyd to greatness. David said The Dark Side of the Moon and The Wall are masterpieces because of Roger's concepts. David said he respects Roger's talent even if he cannot stand Roger's personality. Second, David confirms that Roger was impossible to work with. In a 2024 interview, David said Roger treated everyone like servants. Roger could not collaborate, could not compromise, could not accept that other people had good ideas too. David said Roger's need for total control destroyed Pink Floyd. David said if Roger had been willing to share creative power, the band might still be together. Third, David reveals his biggest regret. He wishes he had stood up to Roger sooner. In a recent podcast, David said he let Roger dominate for too long. David said he should have fought for Rick Wright, should have demanded more creative input, should have drawn boundaries. David said his passivity allowed Roger to become a tyrant. David said he shares blame for how things ended. Fourth, David reveals what he really thinks about the feud. He thinks it is sad and pointless. David said in a 2024 interview that he and Roger wasted decades being angry at each other. David said they created something beautiful together. They should be celebrating that. Instead, they spent 40 years fighting over who deserves credit. David said it is a tragedy. Most importantly, David reveals whether reconciliation is possible. In a stunning 2024 interview, David said he has tried to reconcile with Roger multiple times. David said he reached out privately, suggested they have dinner, talk things through, make peace before it is too late. Roger rejected every offer. David said Roger is still angry about the lawsuit, still believes David stole Pink Floyd from him. David said Roger cannot let go of the past. David also said he has let go of his anger toward Roger. David said holding grudges at 79 is exhausting and pointless. David said he forgives Roger for everything: the control, the insults, the lawsuit. David said he hopes Roger can forgive him too, but David said forgiveness has to be mutual. David said he has done his part. The rest is up to Roger. Today at 79, David Gilmour lives quietly with his wife Polly Sampson. He has retired from large-scale touring. He plays guitar for pleasure, not obligation. He has made peace with his legacy. He is proud of what Pink Floyd accomplished. He has no regrets about continuing the band without Roger. The music speaks for itself. David says now that Pink Floyd was the defining achievement of his life. Not just the music, but the experience of creating something bigger than himself. David says working with Roger was difficult, but it produced art that will last forever. David says that is what matters, not who was right or wrong, not who deserves more credit. The art. David also says he thinks about Roger often, wonders how he is doing, hopes he is happy. David says despite everything, they are connected forever. Two men who created magic together, two men who destroyed each other, two men who cannot escape their shared history. When asked what he wants people to know about Roger Waters, David always says the same thing. Roger is brilliant and impossible, visionary and controlling, talented and difficult. David says Roger made Pink Floyd great and Roger destroyed Pink Floyd. Both things are true. David says that is the paradox of Roger Waters. What David Gilmour reveals at 79 is a truth about creative partnerships. Sometimes the person who brings out your best work is also the person you cannot stand to be around. Roger Waters pushed David to greatness, but Roger also made David miserable. That tension created incredible music. It also created incredible pain. David says now that he would not change anything. The fights, the lawsuit, the decades of feuding, all of it led to the music. And the music was worth it. David says Pink Floyd's legacy is secure. The albums will outlive both him and Roger. That is immortality. The lesson David wants people to take from his story is this: ego destroys everything. If he and Roger had been less concerned with control and credit, they might still be friends. They might still be creating together. But ego got in the way. Pride got in the way. And now they are two old men who barely speak despite sharing one of the greatest partnerships in rock history. At 79, David Gilmour finally reveals what really happened with Roger Waters. It was not one big fight. It was 1,000 small fights. It was not one betrayal. It was years of resentment building until explosion. It was two brilliant, stubborn men who could not figure out how to share. That is the truth, and it is tragic and human and real.